video library. Washington Journal continues.
And at our set in New York City at Pace University, joining us next is former Senator Russ Feingold of Wisconsin. Senator Feingold has a new book out called While America Sleeps. You selected the title, as you tell, from Winston Churchill's famous book from World War II, While England Slept. What are you trying to do with this book, Senator? What are you telling Americans about the state of our international relations and our terrorist threat right now?
Thanks so much for having me on the show. Yeah, during the 10 years after 9/11, when I was serving in the United States Senate on the Foreign Relations Committee, on the Intelligence Committee, and the Judiciary Committee, I saw some changes in the way we were responding to 9/11. At first, I thought things were very good. It was a terrible tragedy, but we were going to work together as a people to address this issue. And then things sort of started to go downhill, especially with the divisiveness over what I consider to be the mistaken war in Iraq. And then we entered a period that I think we're in now, where I basically think we've sort of gone back to sleep on not only al-Qaeda, but sort of being concerned about the rest of the world. Part of it's understandable, of course, because of the economy. But some of it's just political manipulation, saying, look, trying to just blame President Obama for the economy and let's not talk about anything else. Well, I think that's dangerous. And it reminded me of Churchill. Churchill gave some 35 or 40 speeches in the House of Commons during the 1930s and early 40s, where he basically said, look, I know we're not used to worrying about the rest of the world here in England because we're an island nation. We haven't been conquered for 1,000 years. But, folks, the Germans are rearming. And his essays were put together by his speeches were put together by his son in a book called While England Slept. Well, I had never read the book, but that title sort of reminded me of what I think we're slipping into now. A country that somehow believes, 10 years after 9/11, that we can go back to our sort of island, if you will, mentality, that we're over here on the other side of the world and the rest of the world will simply take care of itself. We can't do that anymore if we want to be safe and if we want to be successful. So that's the spirit of the book and why I wrote it.
You have, I'm going to segue quite quickly into presidential politics. You have signed on to be a supporter and advisor of the Obama re-election effort. I'm wondering whether or not you think there is sufficient discussion in this year, when we've got a bad economy, about international relations in the presidential.
It's completely insufficient.
Sorry.
It's completely insufficient discussion of international matters in the campaign, and that's partly because of this manipulation. The candidates on the Republican side and the right in this country don't really want to talk about foreign policy partly because of the legacy of the Bush administration, and partly because Barack Obama's done a pretty darn good job. I mean, Osama bin Laden's gone, Gaddafi's gone, al-Awlaki is gone in Yemen. The president has got a much better reputation around the world than George Bush. So one of the reasons they don't want to talk about it is they don't want to give him any credit for doing a good job. And I think he's done a very good job. They also want to sort of make a big deal, try to say that he's always apologizing for America. They make fun of his foreign trips, which I think were very good, to places like India and Indonesia. And then they have these absurd comments like Herman Cain, who I miss a little bit because he helped me make my point. They ask him about Uzbekistan, and instead of having any kind of a thought about, that part of the world, he goes, "Oh, I'm not going to pretend that I know anything about Becky Stan. Well, Uzbekistan's not a joke. It's the country right to the north of Pakistan and Afghanistan. When we have problems with Pakistan and we need to get our armaments and our other things into Afghanistan because of a war that shouldn't be going on anymore, well, then we have to send Hillary Clinton and make deals with basically a Stalinist dictator, Islam Karimov, in Uzbekistan. Well, maybe this sounds new to people, but you know what? It has to do with our national security and, frankly, the safety of our own troops. And yet, the Republican candidate's whole idea is to just make fun of it. That it's cool not to know anything. And you know what? It really isn't. And it's dangerous for America. So we need to have a conversation during the campaign and after, as Americans, not as people in political parties, as Americans, that we need to be together on these issues, even if we want to keep fighting about the domestic issues.
With regard to Iraq, you detail in the book, and you've just referenced it, that you were concerned from the get-go about America's policy objectives, and you didn't think the war was a good idea. But in fact, of course, we were there. We were there for a decade. And now Republicans are criticizing President Obama's decision to bring the troops home. And in fact, we are seeing stories, as we did this morning, of major bombings across the country, thinking that perhaps al-Qaeda is trying to destabilize further. And I'm wondering about any gains we made during the 10 years that you are concerned about that we might lose with the pullout schedule.
Well, the idea of going into Iraq was a terrible idea. And President Bush ran around the country saying, you know, Al-Qaeda is operating in 60 countries around the world. He used an official State Department list. Well, guess what? That list included, of course, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Ireland, and Iraq wasn't even on the list. How do you think Al-Qaeda decided to go there? Because of the foolishness of putting ourselves in a situation where we were essentially playing Osama bin Laden's game. If you look at his speech that he put on the internet just a couple of days before the 2004 election, he mocked us. He said, I know what to do with these guys. We send a couple of mujahideen to one of these places and the American military comes running. But what we really want to do to the United States of America is bankrupt it, like he said, like we did to the Soviet Union. Well, that's exactly the trap we fell into. And I think we got out of Iraq about 5 years too late. We should have been out of there a long time ago. The idea that we're going to sort of resolve all the issues that have been there from time immemorial in a country like that by invading it and occupying it, you can't do that. You need to work with governments that are friendly around the world to identify Al-Qaeda operatives and to try to keep them on the run or get them, as President Obama has often done. So if people want to argue that we should still be in Iraq, they can go ahead and argue it, but that means we're going to have to invade every country in the world at some point, put our troops there like it's the game of Risk, where you go there, you put your troops there, and you can never leave. I guarantee you that's not something that's going to work.
Senator Feingold, I have the challenge of trying to get two very complex issues on the table here in a very short time so we can get our callers in. I'm going to move right on to the other. The opening sentence of your book, While America Sleeps, is actually around the passage of the legislation that bears your name, McCain-Feingold, the campaign finance reform legislation. And I'm wondering, since it has now had 3 reviews by the Supreme Court, the latest of which was, of course, Citizens United in 2010, what do you think about the state of the legislation today?
Well, it's really interesting. There's a misconception out there that somehow the McCain-Feingold bill has been overruled. Actually, it's the only thing that's left of our campaign finance system. The Supreme Court eliminated a couple of the more minor provisions of McCain-Feingold that, frankly, I did not think was central. What I considered central continues to be the law, which is, you know, corporations and unions can't give unlimited contributions to the political parties, and politicians can't raise it. So that's good. But as John McCain and I always said, this was only one thing, and we needed to build on it. What happened instead was in Citizens United, the entire foundation that we built McCain-Feingold on was destroyed. And that foundation was the long-standing 100-year rule that corporations couldn't use their treasuries. You know, when we buy soap or gasoline, they couldn't use that money for political purposes. And the 60-year-old law that labor unions couldn't do the same thing. So what has actually happened is that the entire campaign finance system has been eviscerated, and only one of the building blocks, McCain-Feingold, still exists. And that is incredibly regrettable, and that's why I created a group last year that is being very successful in raising this issue, Progressives United. progressivesunited.org, which is the group in America working with other groups like Democracy for America, MoveOn.org, and others to raise awareness of how devastating this, one of the worst decisions in the history of the Supreme Court, actually is to our system of government.
A question for you you are critical of President Obama for deciding that he will in fact accept super PAC participation in his re-election bid. Some pundits and politics are calling this a game changer. Would you explain why you think it's a bad idea for him?
Well, I do think it's a bad idea for the president to allow his people to be involved with super PACs. It doesn't look to me at all like who Barack Obama is, and I am proud to be a co-chair of his re-election campaign because, as I've already said, on the wide range of issues, especially on international issues, I think he's doing a very good job, and we need him as our president. But, you know, he's doing well right now. I think the only thing that's sort of a drag on his campaign at the moment, with the economy improving, is any kind of affiliation with this increasingly corrupt system. I think it's a way for Democrats to lose, not only at the presidential level, but at the local level. Because if any Democrat in their right mind believes that we're going to win a battle that has to do with corporate money, they're crazy. We're going to lose by being corporate light. We're going to come out on the short end of the stick. We can never compete if the question is who has the most money in a system of corporate contributions. Add to that, guess what you're going to get for policy? You're not going to get progressive Democratic policy. What you're going to get is corporate policy. You're going to have corporate Democrats. And we've seen this before. Before John McCain and I shut down the soft money system successfully in terms of political parties, what did soft money buy? Soft money bought NAFTA and GATT and other trade agreements that shipped our industrial base of this country overseas because Democrats and Republicans were both corporatized. We destroyed a lot of the freedom and diversity of our media through the Telecommunications Act, which really destroyed a lot of the differences and opportunities for individuality in radio. And of course, as I sit here in Manhattan, we think about the corporate purchase of both Democrat and Republican votes to destroy our economic system vis-a-vis Wall Street, to repeal the Glass-Steagall Act, which was the key protection after the Depression of our banking system, of the protection of people's money by separating investment houses from banks. Well, this was all part of this ugly system. It's back, and it's back with a vengeance. And if anybody believes that there really is some kind of independence, as the law requires, of the super PACs from the candidates, that's a joke that even justices of the Supreme Court are already saying they know is a farce. And I think this decision not only can be overturned, but will be overturned, especially if President Obama gets to pick the nominees for the Supreme Court.
Okay, let's get some calls. And the first is from Madison, Wisconsin. Tony's a Democrat out there. Tony, you're on for Russ Feingold. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. First-time caller, long-time listener. Secondly, this is a great service to the country. It's only too bad that it's not on free TV. Senator Feingold, I wanted to say thank you for being the only sane voice during the conception of the Patriot Act to say, hey, hold on, maybe we should slow this. With regards to your comment about the Republican candidates and their lack of willingness to speak on foreign policy, I was just curious about your opinion towards Ron Paul and maybe considering a Feingold-Paul ticket. Thank you.
Well, it's great to hear from Madison, Wisconsin, of course. I live right next to it in Middleton, Wisconsin. Obviously, Ron Paul and I agree on some issues. He was willing to challenge some of our unwise interventions at various times in Iraq. He believes that we ought to have some serious congressional review of interventions overseas, including getting more serious about the power to declare war on behalf of the Congress. He opposed the Patriot Act. I was the only senator to do it, but there were a number of congressmen who were smart enough to say, wait a minute, this thing goes too far. I don't agree with some of his other views that have to do with aspects of immigration and some of the other issues in the country. So I'm not going to be voting for Ron Paul, but we do have some common ground. And I compare him favorably on many issues to the just pure talking points of the Republicans candidates on issues like Iran or campaign finance. These guys really have no real differences between them. Of course, Romney, you're not quite sure which side he's on from one day to the next, but at least Paul presents a little different point of view.
Our next call for the former senator is from Woodstock, Illinois. Lydia, Independent. Good morning.
Good morning. I appreciate all that you've done, and I think you have a tremendous background in terms of honoring our owner's manual, which is the Constitution. Now, I'm going to give you a challenge because Arnold Toynbee, in his book, A Study of History, describes civilizations, and it's civilizations, not people, not races, that are the proper unit for analysis. Now, we are the stewards. We have a stewardship responsibility to our form of government, and that is why we have to safeguard our process first before we go into other units, into other nations. They can look to us, and we can demonstrate through example. Now, I hope you read Arnold Toynbee's book and you reference it in your discussions with the White House, because it is a manual for what is going on currently. And I will pick up your book. In fact, I will read it next week. I have a lot of respect for you, but I think we have to demonstrate this is a larger issue rather than just progressives. Okay? Thank you.
I should probably, you bet, wonderful comments. I should be reading some more Toynbee myself as I continue to study this subject. But you make a really good point about the Constitution and our stewardship of it. Half of my book, While America Sleeps, is about errors we made, in my view, about how we looked at the rest of the world and our military interventions and that aspect. But the second part is a concern about the way in which the fears of 9/11 were exploited domestically for political purposes. And this is particularly true in two areas. One is in the area of the Patriot Act and legislation that was used as a vehicle to essentially put into place an old wish list of the FBI having to do with looking at people's library records and doing searches of their homes when they're not there, that really had nothing to do with terrorism in particular and was just a power grab. That was one example of the abuse. The other was, in my view, the outrageous interpretation of Article 2 of the Constitution, of the Commander-in-Chief power under George Bush and John Yoo, his legal advisor in the Office of Legal Counsel. They basically took a new view. They said, well, we've been attacked by a different kind of organization, therefore the law doesn't really apply anymore. So if Congress and the President have signed a bill saying, if you want to do some wiretapping, you need to go to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, actually we don't have to do that. That law doesn't apply to us because we're the Commander-in-Chief. This is a direct attack on our Constitution, the very foundation that the founders put together of saying there needs to be checks and balances. It is one of the most important developments coming after 9/11, and it has not been fixed, and it needs to be fixed. So yeah, the whole story of America going to sleep includes not just not knowing what's going on in the rest of the world, but not knowing what's been done to us and our freedoms since 9/11 and the fact that it hasn't been fixed.
Got another Madison caller for you, Senator. This is Brad, a Republican there.
Hey, Mr. Feingold, how are you doing this morning?
Brad, how are you? What,
I'm
is
doing
it snowing?
good.
Is it
I'm
snowing?
sorry?
Is it snowing in Madison?
You know what? It is actually wrapping up. But yeah, we got
It's wrapping up. Okay,
3 or 4
good to get
inches.
the report.
Yeah, yeah, but it's better than most of the weathermen around here. I didn't say that. I just wanted to thank you for your service. You know, I'm a Republican myself, but I voted for you over Ron Johnson, and I'm not really too impressed from what I've seen from old Ron. But just wanted to ask you, if you were to run for president, you know, what would your budget proposal be? I mean, honestly, to cut some spending and save us young people like myself here for the next 20, 30 years. What would you cut? And not the obvious answers. Don't hit me with defense. Thank you.
Okay. Well, first, Brad, thank you. This is exactly what Wisconsin can be about and has been about in the past, which is here is a Republican who calls me up, says obviously doesn't agree with me on everything, did vote for me independently, which I, of course, appreciate. And, you know, we may not agree on the question you've asked me, but this is where what we've got to get back to, instead of this blood and guts stuff where everybody vilifies each other. So I thank you for your attitude. You know, I haven't been thinking on a daily basis about what kind of budget I would put together for the country. But I would say this, that when I came to the United States Senate, I came in with a specific 82-point plan that had to do with ideas all the way from getting rid of a outdated wool and mohair program or helium program to larger ideas about closing tax loopholes. And we put that into place, and working with both parties in the 1990s, we actually got rid of the deficit before George Bush came into office. Now look, part of the answer is going to have to be not having the Bush tax cuts extended forever. I don't think we can afford to have the complete elimination of the estate tax, for example. You know, this is it. I think people should have a serious exemption of up to $10 million per couple. But if you have $100 million, it is not necessary to completely give up that kind of revenue. But on the spending side, I guarantee you, there are many places where we can identify programs that don't work. And I had a great deal of success in doing that in the Senate, identifying things that have no longer have their usefulness, because, you know, Ronald Reagan was right when he said something to the effect that the closest thing to immortality is a federal program. It developed its own constituency. Some of our foreign policy programs, like the aspects of the so-called Radio Free Europe, are things that had their relevance at one time, but really became wasteful and bloated. So we need to have that kind of analysis, not on a partisan basis. And you say, you know, defense spending. Well, you know, this isn't a question you're cutting defense spending, but making sure defense spending is relevant to the threats that are around us. Way too much of the defense budget goes to those military contractors and to military things that don't work particularly well, such as the Osprey helicopter. We need to, let's say you and I could agree we're not going to cut it, but let's make it more efficient. And let's make it more targeted to what we need to do. So those would be some of the things I would look to in formulating a budget, but I have not given it comprehensive thought at the moment.
Well, his question was predicated on future political ambitions. I must tell you there's a bit of a discussion going on with my Twitter community here as you're talking about what your interests and intentions might be in the future. Wisconsin governor, presidential bid. What are you thinking about for your political future?
I'm not thinking about running for office at all. I've resisted requests that I run for office during this 2-year period. My family's very happy about it. After 28 years in a row of being in public service, I'm in the private sector. I'm a private citizen. You know, some of these guys who campaigned against me were right. It's a good thing once in a while to have an opportunity to look at the world this way. And I completely disagree with the idea that public service is bad, which is what they tried to say, that it's somehow a wrong thing to serve honorably the public. It's a great thing. But I have an opportunity right now to sit back and really think, write about what I've written about in my book, While America Sleeps. I never had the chance to sit down and do that because I was addressing the day-to-day issues that I needed to address. Dairy farmer issues in Wisconsin. We had a flood in Wisconsin. You had to deal with that right away. We had to deal with the budget. There is a place for people who have been in public life to come back and say, look, I've seen this. I was on the Intelligence Committee. I was on the Foreign Relations Committee. I am very worried that we are losing our focus on what happened to us on 9/11, what can happen again. Yes, I could do that as an elected official, but frankly, at the moment, I'm having a better success in getting that message out as somebody that is writing and thinking and talking about it, and I think there's a place for that in America as well.
While you reference your book, people should know the style of it is very often a tick-tock of events, where you were at certain times, what meetings you were in, who said what to whom. Curious about how you kept all of the details of that for all these years that you write about in the book.
Well, I should have kept a journal, but I didn't. I didn't have that kind of discipline. Again, because you're always addressing the thing that's right before you. A lot of it came from memory in the book, remembering incidents. But I have this tendency to come back from a meeting or a trip and make my staff listen to my stories. So they had heard the stories. And then I hired a research assistant, a guy from my town, Jeremy Tollefson, and I asked him to go and interview people that had worked with me, see if they remembered the incidents the same way I did. We even wanted to make sure about some meetings, a meeting we held with Ben Ali in Tunisia, the guy that was driven out of there. We went back and Jeremy talked to the ambassadors at the time to see if they had the same recollection we did. So we tried to do quality, careful research, and I believe my recollections with this kind of help are as accurate as possible. And some of the more entertaining stories, I'm pretty sure I know for sure that those are right because I laughed pretty hard when a couple of them happened. It's a serious book, but there is some entertaining stuff about Senator Helms and Vice President Biden and other stories that I think people would enjoy, but we try to use them to make a serious point.
Any pushback from some of your former colleagues about revealing details of discussion inside some contentious meetings?
Well, I was over at the New School here in Manhattan the other night, and the guy that was going to introduce me and moderate is Bob Kerrey. And one of the funniest stories in the whole book relates to Bob Kerrey. And I walked in, I thought, you know, is he going to punch me in the face? He asked me if he could tell the story in the introduction. And so far, so good.
Next for Senator Russ Feingold, Irvine, Kentucky. Dwight, Independent, you're on. Good morning. Hello, Dwight, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Everyone's talking about the Middle East, and I think our real enemy, China, here. Corporations don't want to take any responsibility anymore, so they move jobs overseas while they get tax breaks. And this and all these wars is bankrupting America. It just don't make any sense. I like to say on a couple of calls a while back, the caller in Florida, he was a Republican. They want to raise minimum wage there. All I like to say there, my Republican redneck friends here would say everything will go up. So that's all I've got to add.
Okay, thanks very much. Your comments on minimum wage, his last thought, is what effect it has on the overall economy.
Well, if I could, first let me just respond to the first part where I just say bingo to that. Here's a caller that's saying, wait a minute, you can't just focus on the Middle East, as important as it is. What about China? What about China's influence in Africa, which is something I saw a lot of? And you can be concerned about Iran getting a nuclear weapon, but what about Iranian influence in Latin America? That's something that we need to become more aware of. We need to figure out a way to look at the world globally. Al-Qaeda, in my view, is still very active in Northern Africa. And Michael Leiter, the former counterterrorism chief, as I point out in While America Sleeps, says that there's still a serious challenge there. Al-Shabaab is a chapter of Al-Qaeda in Somalia. In northern Africa, in places like Algeria and Mali, there is Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. In Nigeria, there is a group called Boko Haram, which is carrying off huge numbers of attacks, both on Western targets and internal religious targets against Christian churches and the like. And it appears to me that they either have an Al-Qaeda connection or use the same tactics. So we have to be able to look at these different places at once. As to the minimum wage, I'm a strong believer that a strong minimum wage is necessary. It is very important to protect the livings of people that, particularly at this time, it gets to the point, if you don't have an adequate minimum wage, where people simply can't make ends meet, even if they're working 2-3 jobs, both people in the couple. The minimum wage, I think, is a good program, and I have, of course, when I was in both the state Senate and the U.S. Senate, consistently supported reasonable increases.
On the economy, this tweet from PWG944, who writes, please explain the relationship of NAFTA, other trade deals, to loss of U.S. manufacturing.
Yeah, the North American Free Trade Agreement, the deal with China, and the GATT agreement and other deals, the Central American Free Trade Agreement, all were basically cooked out of the same broth, basically. What they were agreements that pretended to be balanced, but were heavily balanced toward the countries that were on the other side of the deal and the American or international corporations that were part of it. There weren't enforcement mechanisms in case the workers' rights in those countries were not respected. There was fancy language about respecting it, but no way to enforce it. This is how we lost jobs to Mexico, and a lot of those jobs in Mexico were then shipped to China. And then we lost huge numbers of jobs to China and many other countries. And Wisconsin has percentage-wise, one of the largest industrial manufacturing bases in the country. And we took devastating losses of long-time, wonderful companies all throughout what's known as the Fox River Valley, places like Green Bay and Manitowoc, Sheboygan, and those places, as well as the loss of industry in a city like Milwaukee, which was once one of the greatest manufacturing towns in America, and still, of course, has some. But we've lost many of those because of trade agreements that were paid for with soft money that both parties were involved in until the McCain-Feingold bill shut that scam down.
Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Tyrone, Republican. Good morning. You're on for Russ Feingold. Go ahead.
Good morning, Ms. Susan and Senator. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm a Ron Paul supporter, and I hope I haven't. Don't mean to put you on the spot. I haven't had a chance to read your book. I read part of the previous Pat Buchanan's book. My point comes down to the economy and how we're investing money in foreign aid. And I get in trouble when I say this because a lot of people take it the wrong way, and I hope you don't, Senator. But I think we are a bankrupt nation. With the debt we have, we're never going to get out of this debt with the intervention policies that we have. And I think much of it has to do with the security of Israel. I'm not against the security of Israel, but I think us going into Iraq, on the verge of going into Iran to try to prevent their nuclear proliferation, which there's no proof that they have these weapons, or they're trying to, really have the means to get them. And I guess what I'm trying to say is at some point we're going to run out of money to help out of these foreign countries, paying Israel to stay a step ahead, paying their neighbors not to attack them. And at some point, when our money runs out, what will happen to the state of Israel? I mean, we're not going to have the money. China won't take them under their wing. And the only outlet they're going to have is to go back to Europe. And when they depend on Europe, the Jewish nation the Jewish people always gets in trouble when they go over there because we simply can't sustain.
Tyrone, can jump in there. Thank you. Russ Feingold.
Well, Iran isn't just a threat to Israel, which it is. It's a threat to the United States of America if they get nuclear weapons. So both because Israel's an ally and because of the direct threat to our security as well as other European allies of ours, I think we need to take seriously what's going on in Iran. But that doesn't mean I'm advocating an invasion or an attack. I just think we need to make sure they don't get a nuclear weapon. And as to foreign aid, I agree with the caller a little bit with regard to this. I don't want us to just throw a bunch of more money at a lot of different countries in order to solve our problems. What I try to say in my book, While America Sleeps, is I'd like to see a very small amount of money help Americans reach out to these other countries and spend some time in countries at improving our knowledge of those countries and having a more positive relationship with people in other countries. Let's be citizen diplomats. Let's help Americans maybe with grants to go for 2 or 3 weeks a year to help people and to help them learn certain things that would be of use to them. And maybe they can help us learn things as well. A great example is a guy in Pulaski, Wisconsin named Damon Szymanski. He came to me in 1994 and said, Russ, I'm a dairy farmer, but I had the opportunity to go to a former Soviet republic and visit a dairy farm. And so this older farmer went out to a dairy farm, and he said there was so much bacteria in the milk at the dairy farm, the milk could have walked to market by itself. That's sort of a Wisconsin joke. But he helped them come up with better techniques. 10 years later, he comes back to my office, and he'd gone to something like 30 other countries and done the same thing. He is helping us without huge foreign aid show that America is interested in other people, that we want to share information and skills, and it also means he learned about that country. He was able to come back to Pulaski and Green Bay area, and he could tell people about what things are like there. We lack a scouting report on other countries. Even high school teams scout the other football team. They have some knowledge. We are at a huge disadvantage when we don't have a sufficient knowledge of the rest of the world, and we need to really bring up our game in this regard.
Bellbrook, Ohio. Mary's a Democrat. Good morning. You're on.
Hi, former Senator Feingold. I have a lot of respect for you as well. Hope you run for a national office again. But the the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dempsey, was just recently on Fareed Zakaria's CNN GPS program. And he, God, it was the most rational conversation or statements I've heard about Iran. There was a sense of a deep understanding of foreign policy. And he said the Iranian regime is a rational actor. And he also said that a strike at this time, these are his quotes, a strike at this time would be destabilizing. And you just said that Iran is a direct threat to the U.S. Iran has never threatened the U.S., and the comments from Ahmadinejad have been misrepresented by some of the very same people who lied our nation into Iraq. Now, I believe you voted against the Iraq War resolution, and I think you were on the Intelligence Committee at that time. Senator Durbin...
I was not on the Intelligence Committee at that time, but I did vote against the Iraq invasion, yes.
Okay, then Senator Durbin, who was, I know, on the Intelligence Committee, voted against it. Do you think that those who, the individuals out of the Office of Special Plans operating out of the Pentagon, that Seymour Hersh and others have written about, those who created and disseminated that false intelligence like the Niger documents, should they be held accountable? And then on C-SPAN, they've often had former head of the CIA's Bin Laden unit, Michael Schur, on. And he has repeatedly said that the three issues, the reason that people in that part of the world are so angry with the U.S. Are U.S. support for dictators in the region, U.S. support for Israel, no matter what they do, no matter how many illegal settlements they continue to build and expand upon, and illegal housing in East Jerusalem, and also our military bases on their land to access the oil in that region. So if you could talk about the core reasons that people in that part of the world are so angry about with the U.S., as Michael Schur has talked about on C-SPAN.
Thank you, Mary.
Well, one of the stories I tell in While America Sleeps has to do with my, frankly, one of my first experiences meeting with a large group of Islamic Americans and foreign students in Madison, Wisconsin, just a few days after 9/11. They had an open house because they wanted to have a dialogue, and went over there and had a wonderful reception. We had a great time talking, and I asked this question that you've basically asked. I said, what is the source of some of the feelings in the Middle East? And although certainly there were comments about Israel and the Palestinians, and at the time prior to the Iraq War, talk about the no-fly policies and the various humanitarian issues in Iraq at the time, the overwhelming criticism was that we supported dictators and despots in the Middle East. That, as you said, that was the big one. Here we are with these values of democracy, human rights, women's rights, and so on, and yet we're supporting people like Ben Ali in Tunisia, Mubarak in Egypt, Salah in Yemen, and even on occasion working with Saddam Hussein when it was convenient for us. So this is what people said. It just galled them that we would have these values, claim this is what we cared about democracy, and yet we'd pick some guy, or Musharraf, we'd pick some guy and just say, let's just go with this guy rather than making connections with the people of that country. That is a fundamental flaw. And I know what people say. They go, well, look, you don't know what you're going to get if you don't back one of these dictators. You know what? That's the chance we have to take. We have to figure out a way to work with the actual people of the country and not pick some strong man who's going to repress people and cause people to hate us much longer. The very root of our bad relationship with Iran has to do with a mistake we made in this regard in the early 1950s. They had finally gotten a freely chosen president or prime minister named Mossadegh. And with the CIA and others, we took him out of power. And this was a great frustration for the Iranian people that led to the dominance of the Shah of Iran, who of course was one of these strongmen that we supported against the wishes of the Iranian people. This is the kind of mistake we've made, and we have to reverse it.
Senator, bringing you back to campaign finance, last Friday in the New York Times, Lindsay Mark Lewis, someone you might know, head of the Progressive Policy Institute, former finance director for the Democratic National Committee, had an op-ed in the Times which was titled, "A Better Way to Buy Politicians." Here's just a little of what Lindsay Mark Lewis wrote. "I've been involved in Democratic politics for 2 decades. I've had a front row seat to observe outside groups tightening grip on American election and reformers' repeated efforts to loosen it, efforts I always supported. Nevertheless, I've decided the best way forward may be to go in the opposite direction, repeal what's left of McCain-Feingold, which severely limits the amount of money parties can collect for their candidates. Doing so wouldn't get rid of the role of money in American politics, but by channeling it back into the parties, it would reintroduce accountability to the system, the lack of which is what makes super PACs so pernicious."
Well, frankly, he couldn't be more wrong. We saw his comments in the New York Times, and through Progressives United, my executive director, the organization, Cole Leistra, responded. It's like saying, there's one system of organized crime, so let's open up another system of organized crime to balance it. That's what it is. We've already seen what this system of soft money did before McCain-Feingold. It was very corrupting, as I write in my book, actually, in some of the speeches I've given. We talk about the fact that you could actually hear people talking about these corrupt contributions to the floor of the Senate while they're voting on it. And so the idea that this gentleman thinks it's a good idea to go back to unlimited contributions to the party raised by senators and congressmen, I mean, that is a completely defeatist attitude. What he's forgetting is that things were much better in the 2008 election. We didn't have these huge contributions because the Citizens United case hadn't occurred, and we had successfully banned soft money to the parties. So what happened? People went with a more democratic route. They went in part with electronic democracy by having the internet be a mechanism where college students and 90-year-olds and others who maybe didn't feel part of the political process and couldn't be part of the huge money game giving $10 or $20 contributions. That was exciting. And corporate America saw that and were worried about it. And in fact, I think they saw the face of democracy and they were terrified. So what did they do? They engineered a decision like Citizens United, and unfortunately the person you mentioned says, well, okay, we'll never be able to deal with that. We can't get that decision overturned. Let's get rid of everything else. To me, that's the most defeatist and sad approach I could think of.
And on that note, Robert Grant tweets this question: will Senator Feingold be putting his energies into the future improvements and changes in campaign finance reform?
That's what I'm doing every day. This is what Progressives United is all about. I founded it with a number of people that I've worked with in the past, as well as some other experts a year ago, right around the time of the anniversary of the Citizens United decision. People can go to progressivesunited.org to be part of a several 100,000 strong group that is working to make people aware of the consequences of Citizens United, but also to support legislation that would help, such as the Disclose Act, to make sure people know where the contributions are coming from, to get rid of the Federal Elections Commission, which is a joke, and have a real enforcement, but also to call out candidates, whether Republican or the president or anyone else, if they're deciding to play this game of getting involved with corporate money through these undisclosed and unlimited contributions. This is a system that I believe is devastating for those who are progressives And so a system where we believe that money shouldn't control policy, but people should control policy. And so we are working every single day, and I think with great success, to highlight everything from the super committee, which we were worried last summer was going to give away the store and create a bad budget, to demanding that there be a real investigation of what happened on Wall Street. And the president actually took some steps in that regard after we raised the issue. So we're proud of what we've done, and we want to encourage people to join us, because we are the group that is specifically focused on this, but we also work cooperatively with other progressive groups like Democracy for America and MoveOn.org to say, together we're going to fight this big money game, instead of just shrugging our shoulders and saying that's the way it has to be.
Just a couple of minutes left, Senator. We have two more calls. One is another Wisconsin call, Montello, and it's Mason, who's an independent there.
Hi, Senator Feingold. I was just wondering if you could give your take on everything that's going on in our state right now. I mean, I don't know if you've covered that already. I kind of got a late start watching this.
Thanks, Mason.
No, we haven't covered it, and he's calling from the granite capital of the world. The best granite in the world is from his hometown. Anyway, yeah, our state has been thrown into a horrible situation. Governor Walker got elected. I understood he won the election. It was one of those elections when all the Democrats lost and he got into office. Good for him. But the problem is he decided to attack our state. He didn't want to work with the other side. He didn't want to be the governor for all people. He decided to divide the state right down the middle by attacking our collective bargaining rights for public employees. This has been around for decades. We were the first state in the country to have this law. Governors of both parties have always understood that it's a good thing to have collective bargaining in this area, and it's a basic right. He used every brutal tactic, every unfair approach you can use, and I know because I served in the Wisconsin State Senate for 10 years. He broke every tradition in a hell-bent desire to destroy this law, and he succeeded for now. But instead, we're saying, and I was one of over 1 million people to sign a petition to recall him. And I don't believe in recalls in general, but we do have a recall law. So what's it for? I think it's for a situation where a governor has completely waged war on the working people of the state in a way that no one could have predicted, and that has divided families and friends and put a state that is usually very genteel and cooperative and community-oriented, he's turned it into sort of a form of a war zone. So we need to reverse that, and we think we've got a good chance of replacing him in probably as soon as early June.
Our last call for you is from Emporia, Kansas. This is Phil, a Republican there. Phil, you're on.
Good morning, Senator Feingold. How are you today?
I'm great, thanks.
I just recently completed Bob Kagan's book, The World America Made. And one of the points he makes in the book is that Americans, we've got this involvement all around the world. We're the superpower, and so we're involved in these things, but the American instinct is twofold. It's on one end, we want to get involved in something, and as soon as we get there, we're looking for the exits. We're looking for a way out. And the instinct, I think, is partly humanitarian. For instance, my wife and I were watching last night the news out of Syria. And we conservatives are often told that we don't have a heart, but we really do. And we were watching the news out of Syria, and it was tragic to see what was going on. And my wife and I were talking about, so somebody's got to do something, realizing that when we talk about somebody, it's going to be us that's doing it. And a few minutes later, we were watching news from Afghanistan about people in the streets rioting over the burning of Korans. 2 American soldiers have been killed. And the instinct there is just pulling away, saying, let's get the hell out of there. This is foolish. How do you address a guy like me that really wants to be engaged in these things, but at the same time, I am really looking for the exits? How do we get our arms around all of that stuff and do the right thing and see the job through?
Well, this is one of the chapters in my book, While America Sleeps, is called In for a Penny, In for a Pound. It has to do with this very syndrome you're talking about, which is something I find very disturbing, is that once we go into a situation, we have the attitude that we have to stay there forever. I mean, getting the job done is sort of a meaningless term. What does getting the job done mean? Does it mean we're going to resolve the differences within Afghanistan that have been there for thousands of years? That's absurd. That's not going to happen. Our purpose of going to Afghanistan was to get Osama bin Laden. We let him get away. Under President Obama, we got him over in Pakistan. So why are we still there? It's crazy to still be there. This is something that is not making any sense and is sapping our economy. There's a different way of doing it. And President Obama showed great wisdom in this with regard to Libya. He didn't send in boots on the ground, so we had to have people there, for years and years because of this argument that once you're there, you can't, you really can't leave until everything's all taken care of. He very wisely engaged the international community. We helped. We did things that made a difference to keep the tipping point going against Gaddafi, and we got rid of the guy. And to me, that shows wisdom. That shows a president who actually gets it, instead of this crazy idea that you have to invade one country at a time and stay there like we're playing the game of Risk, instead of trying to have a better relationship with the rest of the world.
That's it for our time with Russ Feingold. This is his new book, While America Sleeps. It's available wherever you buy books these days. Senator Feingold, thanks so much for talking to the C-SPAN audience this morning.
I greatly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Appreciate it. We will be right back. Our Friday America by the Numbers segment looks at college graduation rates. There's been a big change. We'll tell you about it when we come back.
We got started because